Let's start. Well, it's great to see such an awesome turnout here. I was kind of expecting that, last slot of the conference, probably everybody was out to Tijuana all night doing tequila shooters. I didn't expect such a good crowd, so I'm glad we're here. You probably heard that there's fabulous prizes at the end of the presentation, and maybe that's why you're here. But anyway, I'll assume that it's because you heard what an awesome presentation this is. Anyway, I'm Brian Emanuels. I am from the Passport team. For the last year, I've been the group program manager responsible for Passport, single sign-in, and wallet. Just taken on a new assignment, basically to build a team to provide all the documentation, tools, infrastructure, systems, and support necessary to roll Passport out very broadly to hundreds and thousands and then hundreds of thousands of websites. And that's why I'm here talking to you, because we hope that you'll be our army on the street of people out getting Passport implemented very broadly across the web. Passport is incredibly critical to Microsoft because it's really the core building block service for .NET. When you look at what .NET is all about, software as a service, and allowing and providing building blocks to allow solution providers and to build richer solutions for customers. All those scenarios, guy falling off his bike, zapping his medical information to doctors' offices, or grandparents, receiving photos from the grandkids and zapping them into the picture frame. All of those scenarios depend on having a single, secure way to reliably authenticate yourself to a web-based service that's universally accepted across any .NET service. And to have a way to find and to find other authenticated users that you might want to share information with or grant permissions to. So so all of those scenarios are tied together by a number of building blocks, but it really all starts with Passport. And so if a service isn't using Passport for authentication, it's not .NET, because .NET really needs to have that single universal way of identifying people. And we have a lot of products that are calling themselves .NET, and that's great, fine products, but Passport is really kind of the first example of what a .NET building block service is, and what in terms of enabling people to have access to their information anytime, any place from any device. I just want to give you an example of sort of a crude early example of what the .NET lifestyle really means. And so I'll go into PowerPoint, and I've downloaded an add-on that's now available up on Office Update site to enable Office. I'm going to switch this to enable Office to do Passport login right from within Office. So once I've installed this component, I have this new icon here called My Websites on MSN. And if I try to go to that site, that's a MSN Web Community site, a private community that was built for me automatically when I installed this component. MSN Web Communities uses Passport to control access. So it's popping up a Passport login dialog here, but rather than just shelling out a browser window to type in, I've got a Win32 dialog here that Office has put up that allows me to type in my normal Passport credentials, sign in. It's going off, authenticating me to the Passport login servers, and accessing my files stored up live on the internet. And here's my presentation, so I can open it. Now it's using HTTP DAV to pull that, and the web folders functionality that's in Windows 2000 to pull that presentation down off the net. So I can live the web lifestyle right here today and access my presentation over the net. But rather than waiting for that to download, I'll switch back to the screen, because having it on a notebook is also a pretty nice way to do things. So, all right. So most of what I'm going to talk about today is the here and now. What's Passport today? What can you do with it? But I will just give you a brief glimpse about some of the investments we're making going forward. You just saw an example of the client-side interfaces that we've created for Passport that are XML-based, that allow a client application to post credentials to the Passport login servers. They're in use today by Office, as you can see, and that component will be a native part of Office 10. MSN Explorer, otherwise known as Mars, uses the XML interfaces so that anytime you're using Mars, you're logged into Passport, and you can change your password and have complete. You can completely wrap the Passport experience for the end user customer. Money 2001 also uses these interfaces to allow you to sign into Money Central. We will be adding SOAP support over time to make them more suitable for server-to-server environments. We're also doing a bunch of work with the Windows team to integrate Passport directly into WinINet and the Kerberos SSP. So in Whistler, any WinINet-based application that accesses a Passport-protected website will have Whistler handle the authentication for them. So rather than going to a Passport login page, you'll see a Win32 dialog similar to what you just saw that will allow Windows to manage that authentication. And it'll be a part of IE6, so it'll have down-level support. But if you're running on Whistler, it'll be integrated with the Cred Manager, so the Windows cache will store your Passport credentials and basically make Passport login a feature of Windows rather than something that every application has to deal with and the browser has to display in a window. Beyond that, we're working with them to integrate Passport into the Kerberos SSP to basically turn the Passport login servers into a big KDC in the sky that will have a much more secure protocol for Passport. We're hoping that, but we'll see. We also are working with them to integrate with Active Directory. And this will mean a number of things. Being able to just sign into Windows with my Passport, sign in as brianem@hotmail.com, and then to be able to grant permissions to Passport users in Active Directory. So I could assign ACLs to brianem@hotmail.com to give access to files. We're working with the Visual Studio team and Commerce Server to just integrate Passport directly into them. In anticipation of the question that will come up, yes, we did sort of miss the boat on Commerce Server 2000 and don't have much integration yet. We will, so that Passport just comes with Commerce Server. VisualStudio.net we're hoping will ship with the ASP Plus is planning to include Passport Manager and wrap the Passport API. We've got work underway to support emerging devices. MSN Mobile has already incorporated Passport login into cell phones. We're going to make that and bring that code in and make it a native part of Passport. And we have a pilot underway for smart cards. So we want to be able to, as well as Web TV, will be supporting Passport very shortly. So we want to be, whether you're using a cell phone or a smart card or a handheld or a Web TV or a PC, we want Passport to be the one universal way that you authenticate yourself. We want to move more aggressively in the direction of ID verification. Today, Passport is pretty anonymous. You sign in, you get back a number. But there's scenarios where you'd like to be able to prove who you are, or where a site will require you to prove who you are, either using digital certificates or smart cards or other forms of address or identity verification. We're working to incorporate that into Passport, as well as more and more information gets associated with your Passport. We want to give, ultimately, customers need to be in control of their data and who it's shared with. So we are building centralized consent mechanisms for them to be able to control their data and who it's shared with. So that's kind of some of the stuff we're doing to make Passport sort of universally adopted and incorporated into all devices and all websites. But what I want to focus on today is the here and now, because Passport version 1, it's done. It's been, we'll talk about, it's been live for a year, and it can be deployed in websites and web-based services today. So we're going to cover some of that. I'm going to show demonstrations and go into real detail about the architecture of how it works, and then really focus on how do you implement Passport. I'm hoping that when you all walk out of here today, after picking up your goodies, although I'm afraid there's not going to be enough to go around, you'll be equipped to be armed and dangerous to go out and work with customers around the world to implement Passport, and not just the single sign-in service, but some of the other Passport services. So Passport is not, when you think of Passport, you think of a single name and ID I can use at lots of different websites, but it's more than that. There's actually 4 distinct services that are part of Passport. The single sign-in service, which is the foundation for most of the others, the wallet service for e-commerce to allow you to do transactions, do credit card-based transactions in a more seamless fashion. Kids Passport, which is an extension of the single sign-in service that can help sites that are targeted at kids comply with the Children's Online Privacy and Protection Act law, which is a very big deal for those kinds of sites. So this is a great service for any sites that have a audience that caters to, whose audience are likely to be children, and the public profile service, which is in use on MSN Chat and Messenger, and will be rolled out over other social-oriented sites as well. These services are independent. They, most of them depend on single sign-in service, but not necessarily. For instance, the Passport wallet requires the consumer to have a passport in order to use their wallet, but websites can implement the Passport wallet service without implementing single sign-in. So if they already have their own registration system and want to keep using it, that's fine. They can still use Passport wallet to allow the 75 million Passport holders to use wallets to streamline the purchase process at those websites. So they can be, and that's a very important thing because we are actually out working with a lot of sites to get wallet implemented because it's much more straightforward. And it doesn't require them to implement single sign-in or throw out their existing registration system. So as I said, we've been live since July of last year. First went live on Money. That was when Money Central went live with Passport, and when all Hotmail accounts became Passports. So now there are 75 million members because all 65 million Hotmail accounts, all MSN Internet Access accounts, and 5 million other email addresses have been registered as Passports. So there are domains of Passport IDs that are all Passports, but any email address can be registered as a Passport. In fact, we already have 250,000 AOL and Yahoo addresses that have been turned into Passports. And our goal is for every email address to be a Passport, and for every website to accept it as a form of identification and a form of payment. And there's already more than 50 sites using Passport, internal and third-party sites that are using one or more Passport services today. One of the key things that enables Passport to achieve such broad reach is that it works with basically any browser, i.e. 4 and up, Netscape 4 and up. All it needs is SSL and cookies, and preferably client-side JavaScript, although JavaScript is not strictly required. So basically anybody can use Passport without having to download code to their machine. Passport's live in 29 languages worldwide, with languages supported for 42 distinct locales. So French Belgium and Spanish Latin America each have Passport languages specifically for them and available to them. Passport is very easy to implement. As we'll see, it's a pretty straightforward process. The documentation sometimes leaves something to be desired, which my new team will fix just as fast as we can. But it's really not very difficult to implement Passport, particularly the wallet service. And it's designed to be very customizable so that it can blend in seamlessly with a website. And that's where probably most of the work is taking advantage of that power to make it so that it's very seamless. So for end user customers, the key benefit is just a single name and password that I can use across all participating websites. And generally, I only have to type it in once. Once I've signed into one site, I can use those credentials at another site just with one click of the mouse. It avoids all that repeated data entry of having to re-register at every site I go to and pick another name and forget my password, and then having that data just go stale, like my password. I can't remember what it is, so I have to forget my password. And give you that ability to have that data travel with you anytime, anywhere, on any device, and put the end user in control of their personal information. So, we want Passport very much to be a privacy technology that and a security technology that lets the customer have secure, private access over their information and who gets it. But there's great benefits for websites because it really allows them to outsource some of this low-level blocking and tackling or really plumbing to out to another site. I used to run the Expedia team and had teams of people building our authentication service and tweaking it and fine-tuning it and trying to be compatible with different browsers. And it was a pain in the ass. It was a waste of our development resource. And we ended up taking thousands of emails a day from customers who forgot their passwords. And it cost us a fortune to keep resetting those passwords. Being able to outsource that and say, why build and run that stuff yourself when you can rent it, from Microsoft, particularly now because we're giving it away for free for the foreseeable future. So it's a way to take all that functionality, outsource it so you don't have to run it, and tap into that very large customer base of people who already have passports, who already have wallets, who are ready to use and use your sites and purchase there. And particularly for sites targeted at kids, the Kids Passport program is very very attractive. Another nice thing about Passport is it allows sites to do personalization and ad targeting even for first-time visitors. I mean, today most sites, they start accumulating information about you and store it in a cookie when as you use the site, but until you start interacting or provide some information to you, they can't do any targeting at all. With Passport, as soon as somebody signs in, you get some basic demographic information about them, their country, their zip code, maybe their age, maybe their gender, maybe their email address at the customer's discretion, and you can start using that to provide a more personalized experience. And because it's all stored centrally, it enables roaming and multi-user machines. So everybody doesn't, who uses a machine and shares the same set of cookies doesn't get treated the same. So now I'd like to shift and focus on how does Passport work, and what's the basic architecture of the system, and what's really happening when you're clicking on those sign-in screens across the network. So let me flip back to my other machine here, and you can see the presentation that I downloaded is there. There it is. So it really works. So this is obviously the Money Central site. You can see by the sign-in link here that I'm not signed in yet. It's inviting me to sign in. But say I go, and I'm sure I would guess that at least a couple people in the room have done this. Clicked on the portfolio, said, "Yeah, I want to go see my stocks." Well, that link is going off to the Passport sign-in screen. The portfolio page it requires you to be signed into Passport. We'll talk a little bit more about this, but you can either you can have pages that require Passport sign-in or pages that don't, but will recognize if you are signed in and allow you to personalize. That was a page where you have to be signed in. You can't see the portfolio page unless you're signed in. So the assumption here is it's a fresh start. I'm not signed into Passport. There's no cookies in the visible to MSN that indicate that I'm signed in, and in fact I don't have cookies in Passport either. I'm just not signed in yet. So what happened? The browser, I clicked on that link, and the browser did an HTTP GET to the Passport login server. That's what the sign-in or when you click on that link, it does a redirect to the Passport login server. On that redirect, it includes the site ID, the Money Central site ID, the return URL, which is where do I want them to send the customer back to after they've signed into Passport, and some other parameters. That goes off to the Passport login server, which renders the sign-in page. That sign-in page looks up the site ID from Money Central and looks up some information about them, about the fact that, oh, they want to co-brand this page. They want to add some information to the page. So it responds with an HTTP 200, returns a page to the browser, but that browser contains some co-branding information. Let me switch back here and show you. So you can see I've got the Money Central graphic at the top of the page. I've got some information here that actually comes from kind of outdated, so Money Central, I've been beating on them to fix this, but it contains some information that comes from Money Central and says, basically, here's why you should sign into Passport. But if I look at the source code for this page, further down in the page, I've got a JavaScript source command, which basically says the page the Passport servers return to the browser says, go off and grab some JavaScript from moneycentral.msn.com, ppcobrand.asp. And it will go reach out and grab that JavaScript and load it into the page. And then at various locations further down on the page, we do a document.write command to basically say, take some information that is stored in those JavaScript variables and inject them into the page here and here. And so that co-branding information that you see on the page is actually coming from the Money Central servers and is being squirted onto the page by the browser, inserted onto the page that we send down to the browser, and it's pulling that information in and displaying it on the page. Gets that happen here. One, to get the Passport login page, which then returns a command that says, okay, now go get some information from Money Central and pull that into the page as well. So you get this nicely co-branded page. So then when I post my credentials to the Passport login server, it will, let me go back to the browser here. So if I type my, my credentials. So when I click sign in here, it's going to do a post over SSL to the Passport login servers. Click on that. It's going to sign in and take me back to the return URL that's specified here. So, oops. So There we go. So what happened there was we did an HTTPS post to the login server containing the username and containing my username and password. The Passport login server responds with an HTTP 302 redirect, which is basically a response.write, or I'm sorry, a response.redirect that says, okay, here's a page now, go here. And so what that response does is it says, it sets passport.com cookies. So it sets cookies in the passport.com domain, both secure cookies and unsecure cookies that say, you're signed into Passport now. And anytime I go to another Passport site, it's going to use those cookies to sign me in seamlessly without having to retype my passwords. But it also contains on the query string, so the query string of the return URL, the place that it's going to go back to, we tack on a couple of extra parameters, a ticket parameter and a profile parameter, which I'll discuss in a minute, that are basically the credentials for the site you're going back to. So we redirect now back to Money Central because that's the return URL that was specified. We tack on these parameters that are basically the credentials that Money Central needs. And so that's another HTTP GET, and now the site responds with an HTTP 200, which is like, okay, here's our page. But because they got those ticket and profile parameters, these encrypted passport information on the query string, Passport Manager object on the Money Central site intercepted that, grabbed those ticket and profile parameters, decrypted them, said, oh, great, customers logged, these are valid credentials. I will display this, I will pull out that person's passport ID number, use that to look up their portfolio, and so we can display the portfolio information that was requested. And then the site will write the ticket and profile information into cookies in their domain so that every subsequent page view will see them and you won't have to sign in again. And then we'll clear them off the query string. So now I'm back to this machine. You see I've redirected from the Passport server. I'm back to the Money Central site. And you can see that, that we're down and AOL is up, which is exactly why we need to get Passport implemented at a lot more sites. So now I want to show what happens when I go to the next site. So I'm going to go to my local machine here. Let me switch over now. So in this case, the assumption is I'm signed into Passport, but I haven't yet signed into this machine. So now I'm going to go to Brian EM3. EM3 is just my local notebook here, and hopefully this will work okay. This machine's been really funky this couple days. It hasn't been showing its homepage, but let's see if it works in this case. If not, I can switch over to this machine. I don't understand why it's happening. There we go. Okay. All right. So now I'm running. This is just a sample site that's running on my local notebook here. This sample is up on the Passport.com website and will be incorporated into our SDK soon. So all the code and samples and stuff will be available to you, and I'll be referencing this throughout the demo. But in this case, you see that it says sign in. It doesn't think I'm signed in here because there's no cookies in the Brian AM3 domain. In other words, the AdventureWorks site isn't seeing any cookies to indicate that I'm signed into Passport. So when I click the sign in link here, what's going to happen is it's going to do an HTTP GET to the Passport login server, passing the AdventureWorks site ID, the AdventureWorks return URL. And the Passport login server is going to look at the cookies in the Passport.com domain and say, are these fresh enough for this site? Because part of the parameters that the site specified is how fresh do those credentials have to be? Basically, how long am I willing to go since they've last typed their password? And I'll talk more about that in a second. But the site will redirect to Passport. Will compare the cookies in the Passport domain with their requirements, and assuming they meet the threshold, we will generate ticket and profile cookies encrypted in the key for the AdventureWorks domain, and respond with a 302 redirect to redirect back to the return URL and tack on the ticket profile parameters. And so the way that looks to the end user is I click sign in. I'm going to go bounce off the Passport login servers. Oh, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. Let me just change change this time window back to what I should have set it to. I had it. I didn't reset that after my last demo. Go back to the passport screen, or back to the AdventureWorks screen. So now I'm going to click sign in. Redirect to my. It redirects to the Passport login service. It compares the cookies. It says great. Responds back to the return URL. Tacks on the TNP parameters for AdventureWorks. AdventureWorks gets that information back, or gets the redirect request back. So now the browser is chasing that redirect from the Passport login servers, doing a get to the AdventureWorks site. Now it has the ticket and profile cookies on the query string, so the Passport Manager object, the Passport Manager code running on the AdventureWorks site, grabs the TNP off the query string, says, great, now the customer's signed in, so I'll look up their account information and I'll write cookies out in my domain to prove that they and now the customer signed in at my site. So when you go back here, it shows the sign out link to indicate that I'm signed into Passport. It's also personalized the front page for me now, saying, okay, welcome, Brian. It's pulled that out of my Passport profile, and it shows me that, and it's accessing my account information, telling me that I have something waiting in my shopping cart from the last time I was here. So I didn't have to be signed in to access this page, but once I do sign in, then they're able to show me personalized content on the home page. So that's an example of soft sign in, as opposed to what Money Central did, where it's like you have to sign in to get to the portfolio page. So what happened there was, at sign in, ticket and profile are sent to the site. The ticket basically represents my current session. It contains the all-powerful Passport PUID, or Passport Unique ID. That's a 64-bit number that globally and uniquely identifies a passport, and that's really the key. That's what everybody should key data off of, is that PUID, because everything else, all the other information is potentially optional and may change. The PUID will never change. For as long as I have my Hotmail account, I have a single PUID, and every Passport site is keyed to that, is keyed to the data in that PUID. The profile contains information about the customer. Today, it always contains your country, your state or region, and zip or postal code, depending on your country. And it may contain your age, your gender, language preference, some other information, and at your discretion, it may contain your email address, but it doesn't have to. So when you sign into a Passport site, it can be completely anonymous, and you just get back the number plus some generic demographic information. So those things are encrypted on the return URL. So there's an encryption key that Passport stores for every site, and that's installed on the site's servers in the Passport Manager object. So we hand back a triple DES encrypted version of the ticket and profile information, which the Passport Manager detects. They either see the cookies in their domain if they're already signed in, or they come off or it pulls it off of the URL. It writes cookies into that domain, so on subsequent transactions you don't have to bounce off the Passport login server. It's basically a one-time operation for as long as you've set your ticket freshness window, and then the site cleans the ticket and profile off the query string, because the TNP information is basically your credentials. So if you leave it on the query string, it goes in the browser cache. Somebody can come up to your machine later and take hit one of those URLs, and they're you, because as long as they provide valid TNP parameters to a site, or to that site, they can impersonate you at that site. So it's up to the site to clean that information off, so that somebody can't steal those cookies and go replay them from some other. That all of these redirects, all of these page views, we were always pivoting through the browser. We were always doing redirects from site to site. There weren't any server-to-server calls. There was no time where the AdventureWorks server, Money Central server was sitting, having a thread waiting for the Passport server to respond to something. They always return information to the browser that says, okay, now go here, and the login server says, okay, browser, now go back there. So it's all asynchronous, which is a very, very nice attribute for building a really large-scale service like this. So now I want to shift gears into how do you actually implement Passport? What are the steps you have to go through? What's the code look like that you have to write? And what are some of the options and choices you have to make? And then talk about ways you can customize the Passport screens to make it a very seamless part of a website. And how do you handle migrating, if you already have an existing authentication system, how do you migrate from there to Passport? How do you handle authorization? So first step is read the docs, please, because people sometimes don't do that. We're all Microsoft people, figure, hey, I can just figure this out, and they download stuff and just start coding away, and they make the same mistakes over and over again. You'll save yourself a lot of grief, and you'll save us a lot of grief. You take a couple hours and read some of the basic documentation to understand the kind of gist of the system. The docs aren't great. It's something my team is going to fix, but they're good enough, and they're a heck of a lot better than nothing. So the first place to start is there's a white paper up on the public Passport website that kind of gives the basic overview of how the system works and what information is maintained and how it flows around the system, basically in more detail of what I just demoed. And then our SDK documentation is up there that has much more detail about how Passport works and what the API calls are and that sort of thing. So take a couple hours, familiarize yourself with the documentation so you understand the basics. And then you need to spend some time thinking about, well, how do I want Passport to blend into my website? Where do I want to require Passport sign-in? Where do I want to take advantage of it if you're signed in but not necessarily require it? So what pages, what data need to be protected and how stringently? Do I have an existing system that I need to migrate customers from? There's several different options for how I can get from A to B. I'll go through what some of those options are, but that's something you need to think about because that could affect the way you design the flow through the site, where you expose Passport, etc. And then you need to another decision you have to make is: are you going to have development and test machines where you're doing most of your work? If so, then you probably want to do your work against a set of test servers that we maintain specifically for that purpose, and not do development against the live Passport servers. And I'll talk a little bit more detail about what that means in a sec. So next step would be to actually download and install the Passport SDK, and it's up there on the Passport website. You don't have to write down the URLs. You can just go to www.passport.com, click on the business link, and then click on developer info, and you'll have to go through a little registration process. You have to sign in with Passport and then fill out a little registration process so we find out something about you. But then you'll be able to access the Passport documentation and download the SDK. So the SDK is really two things. It's a copy of the documentation, which is also just available on the website. So if all you want is the docs, you can just read it online. It also contains the Passport Manager object, the hunk of code that runs on your site that we'll talk about more in a minute, that basically provides helper functions for Passport. It also contains a sample site, not this one that we've been looking at yet, but one that's called Example Clothing, which is kind of lame, but it has the nice advantages that it works with Site ID 1. Site ID 1 is this magic site ID that whenever you register a Passport site, we assign you a site ID, and that's basically how your site, when it redirects to the Passport server, identifies itself, so we know how to co-brand and we know what key to encrypt in and that sort of thing. Well, Site ID 1 is basically a generic site ID that says you can use that instead of registering your site, and Passport will mostly work, but you won't get co-branding and you won't actually get real customer data. But it allows you to get your server up and running, verify that it's configured correctly, that it can get to the Passport login servers, you can sign in and get some garbage back. Basically what it means. But it's a good way to kind of make sure that your server is working. And I would recommend that everyone, before you start Passport implementation, get the SDK, download it, make sure the test site is working. Then download this AdventureWorks sample site that we're looking at. There'll be later in the presentation. There'll be links to how to get to it. It's up on the Passport.com website now, although I don't think it's linked to yet because it's brand new. And eventually we will incorporate it into the SDK. But I download that, install it, and start playing with that because it's a good way to sort of illustrate sort of best practices of how to implement Passport. Then you're going to need to register a site ID for your development and test machines. So there's a link there that says, basically there's some information you'll have to provide us. What's the domain of your site? What services are you implementing on the site? What's a link to your privacy policy? What's the URL for your co-brand file? Some basic information like that. So once you sort of have your site figured out, you'll know what those URLs are, and and that bottom link describes the information you'll need to provide to us. And then there's a little wizard there. The siteservices.passport.com site contains a little wizard that you can use to fill out register your site with us, and that will basically send a request to us to issue you a site ID and, if necessary, an encryption key, and we'll send those back to you by email. So if you want to set up the AdventureWorks sample site, you'll need to register a test site. It could kind of sort of work with Site ID 1, but I wouldn't recommend it. Some major parts of it won't work at all. So you'd want to, when you download the AdventureWorks sample site, there's a README there that says, here are the URLs to register, and you can go through the same process to register a sample site for AdventureWorks. In order to support development and test of Passport, we maintain, obviously, the production Passport environment, the real Hotmail domain, the real MSN servers, the real Passport servers with real accounts, real passwords. And that's what real production sites hook up to. So eventually, any site you create will hook up to the production cluster. But in order to support development and test environments, where we don't want to expose the encryption keys and everything for the production environments, we maintain an integration test cluster called Blaze. And there's two versions of it. One that's running the current, start with one that's running the version we're working on next. So if you are working on something that requires integration with a feature in an upcoming Passport release, we have an environment where you can do that. Hopefully, nobody's going to need that. So the default configuration is for your test servers to be configured to the Blaze current environment, which is an exact mirror of the live production Passport environment. It's running the same code. There's a Hotmail cluster called hmgreen.com. There's a Passport cluster called passporttest.com. There's a MSN cluster called manga.net. Basically, a complete set of servers so you can do development and test against a mirror of the Passport production environment. The reason that's important, and let me just say, within those environments, they use different site IDs and different encryption keys. So you'll need to register a site for register a site ID for the development and test environment and get encryption keys and use them on your dev and test machines. But then when you move into production, you'll need a different set of keys and site IDs. And the reason for that is all servers within a domain, such as MSN.com or Microsoft.com or bcentral.com or Yahoo.com, will typically share the same cookie domain. So in the MSN case, Money Central writes its Passport cookies to splatmsn.com or .msn.com to get around an ugly bug in Navigator. Communities will write their cookies to .msn.com. The home page will write them to .msn.com. And Hotmail, same thing. The reason for that is so that anytime you sign into one of those sites, they all have visibility to your cookies. So I sign in at Money Central, Communities knows I'm signed in, Hotmail knows I'm signed in, the home page knows I'm signed in. For that to work, for those to share those cookies, they all need to have the same encryption key. So every MSN.com production server needs to have the same key so they can decrypt those cookies. So we don't want that key sitting on random developer machines for development and test purposes. So that's why we maintain this parallel environment to say, put your production machines in the production environment using production site IDs and production keys, and protect them, guard them very, very closely. If you compromise your key, it's your site, your domain that's exposed. You can't screw up anybody else, but you can screw yourself up. So you want to sort of firewall that off. But then for your development and test environment, so you don't have to be too anal about keys and such, you can create a different set of, you want to use a different set of keys and site IDs for doing your development and test work. One thing you need to know if you set up a Passport server, a single sign-in server, and much of what I'm talking about here, anything with regarding keys, is specifically talking about single sign-in, is that your server needs to be able to reach out to the Passport to the Passport site periodically to a site we call the Nexus, which is basically just a big web farm that serves up a partner XML document. Partner XML is an XML file for partner sites that basically describes the Passport network. It says, hey, there's a Hotmail domain, and there's an MSN domain, and there's a Passport domain, and there's a default domain, which is where random email addresses go. And here's where the login servers are for each of them, and here's where the registration servers are for each of them. So your server needs to have that information cached in memory. So periodically, once a day or something, the Passport manager on each of your servers is going to wake up and go, I'm going to go get a new copy of Partner XML from the Passport Nexus. So it does a get over SSL with basic auth, passes this long sign-in name and password to the Passport Nexus to retrieve the Partner XML doc. That means that and this is the only time there's ever server-to-server communications, but it's happening asynchronously, so it's not like it's not happening in the course of a user transaction. So your servers will wake up and try to reach the Passport servers. Well, they have to be able to do an outbound get over port 443 to be able to the SSL port in order to get the Partner XML doc. Some firewalls, such as Microsoft's ITG proxy, don't allow this. So the servers aren't able to reach out to the Passport servers and to either the live servers or the test servers and get them. So in those cases, and sometimes if you use a big IP solution, you have the same thing, and sometimes network administrators will just lock down outbound port 80 from production servers. Not a bad idea, but it does kind of screw up Passport. So what you need to do in that case is have a proxy, have some server or machine that can reach out and pull the partner XML file down, get it down inside your firewall, and then configure your machines to point to your proxy to get the partner XML from there. And basically there's just a registry key on each Passport server that says, where do I get the partner XML doc from? Either the live production nexus or the Blaze nexus, or a proxy of the nexus. And so for internal sites, we have a proxy, basically just a box that just pulls the partner XML down periodically and has it inside the Microsoft firewall. So machines on the CorpNet can just point at that box to get the partner XML file. So the document described here, and you'll get all these slides, of course, at the end of the, or when you get home at some point, has a link here, or you can just go to our HTTP Passport internal website, which, again, is lousy, and we'll fix it soon. But if you can find your way to this document, it'll basically say, here's the registry keys you need to have for, here's what you set the registry key to for production machine, or for CorpNet machines that need to hook up to Blaze, or CorpNet machines that want to hook up to production. So once you've got Passport Manager downloaded, installed, you've got the test site working, you've got AdventureWorks up and running, and you've played with it, and you've got your sites registered, then you're ready to actually start implementation. And it's fairly straightforward. Most examples I'll talk about are for ASP-based machines, but everything works in ISAPI as well. So the first thing you need is a logout page. Basically, when you log out of Passport, we call this page on your server to say, okay, log out. So you'll delete any cookies that you have in the Passport domain. Most people just take this straight out of the SDK, plop it on their servers, and register the URL for it. You may not have to modify it at all. You'll probably want to write co-branding files so that you can customize the Passport login, registration, or wallet pages. It's not required. It's not, it's a good idea. So those would be new pages that you'd have on your site. For the other pages on your site, you just script a Passport Manager, and we'll go through some examples of how you instantiate Passport Manager on your pages and how you control whether or not sign-in is required or not. And then, and once you've got your pages coded and site's working, you're ready to go live, you contact us again to get a production site ID and encryption key. You install that key and configure your servers with that key, and away you go. And so configuring for production basically means you change your site ID, you install the production key for that site ID, and you change your registry entry, or you set up your registry entry on your production machine to point to the production partner XML rather than the Blaze partner XML. So the Passport Manager is a hunk of code. It's a dual interface COM object that we provide. It's in our SDK. That you install on your servers, either a development and test machine or on your production servers. It basically provides helper functions to manage the authentication for you, to decrypt the Passport cookies that come back, to write cookies out when they come back to write them in your domain when they come back from the query string, when they come back on the query string, to create the sign-in links properly so that they'll go to the correct place. It's available for Windows NT, Windows 2000. It's also available now for several Unix flavors. In particular, Solaris is available now, Linux, I think next week, and we're porting to, I think, 4 other versions of Unix over the course of this year. This is one key point about this object is it's only required for single sign-in. If you're just implementing the wallet service, you don't need to put code on your servers, so none of this applies. But if to implement the single sign-in service today, you do need to have code running on your servers and have an encryption key, and that's what Passport Manager is and what it does. The manager object can be instantiated either at page scope or application scope. Most people will just do server create object in the within the page and instantiate the Passport Manager object within the page, and then you have full access to all the Passport Manager functions. That can be some extra overhead, right? If so if you don't need it, or if you just are using using it for some very lightweight functions, you may want to load the Passport Manager object use what we call the factory object to load it at application scope. So we get loaded in your global ASA file, but there's some restrictions on that are described in our SDK. And all of the Passport Manager functions are available to ISAPI code as well. And basically, the API directly maps to ISAPI. And some sites have implemented Passport as an ISAPI filter, or with using ISAPI filters. Other sites have implemented it just in, most sites have just implemented it with ASP. It's very straightforward. So what I want to do is show you the sign-in code and show you some of the things you can do in ASP script code to utilize Passport Manager. So I'm back to the AdventureWorks site here, and bring up Visual InterDev. And this is a include file that builds the header for all of the AdventureWorks pages, and it basically just includes standard code for all their pages that includes the Passport Manager. It doesn't actually instantiate the Passport Manager object here, so I can't show you that script without digging around for it, which I don't want to waste your time with. But it's very basic: server create object Passport Manager .1. Now you've got an object called Passport Manager that you can make calls to. So the first thing this code does here is says, okay, call the Passport Manager and say, is there a ticket? Basically, do I see cookies in this domain that indicate that the customer has signed in? If so, how fresh are they? So it says, I see cookies, but it doesn't meet my criteria for being authenticated within the time window that I've specified. So the isAuthenticated call takes two parameters. A time window, which says how long, what's the maximum amount of time I want to have allowed to be elapsed since the customer signed in. 2 weeks, 5 minutes, it's up to you. You can decide basically how frequently people have to sign in. And you can control whether or not they have to have physically typed their password, or whether you simply wanted to have their credentials refreshed by the Passport server. So what it does is it says, okay, I've got credentials, but they're not fresh enough for me. Maybe a guy signed in yesterday, and I want to make sure he signed in within the last hour, which is what the case here. It's set to 3600. So in this case, what I want to do is silently re-authenticate the user. So I'm going to do a response.redirect. I'm going to redirect them over to the Passport login server. And the way that I get the address for the Passport login server is I call Passport Manager auth_URL. Auth_URL takes several parameters, including the time window and force login. The first one is a return URL, which is basically send them back to this page when you're done. And so what this is saying basically is once they, if the credentials aren't fresh enough, send them over to the Passport, login server to refresh their credentials, and then bring them back here once their credentials are fresh. So to switch back to logo tag, or auth_URL or logo tag, which is what displays the logo tag is what displays the little sign-in link. You specify the time window parameter and the forced login, number of seconds since their credentials were generated, and whether or not they had to physically type their password, or whether you just wanted the credentials to be refreshed. Sites that have real sensitive data, like our wallet site, for instance, where we're unlocking your credit card vault, we have we put a 5-minute timeout on that, and we say force login equals true, meaning before you can get in use your wallet, you have to have physically typed your password within 5 minutes. And if you walk away from your computer, or somebody tries to take those cookies over to another computer, after 5 minutes, they're not going to be able to impersonate you. Other sites, like if you're just sort of protecting personalization on a home page or something, you might want to say, hey, 2 weeks and force sign-in equals false. Just as long as they've been authenticated by Passport somewhere within 2 weeks, good enough for me. So it's up to you, and the range is 100 seconds to 1,000,000 seconds, which is about 2 weeks. So let's demonstrate how that works. Go back to this code sample, and what it's doing there is saying, all right, if you're signed in, then I want to refresh your credentials if they're not within the timeout window. If you're not signed in at all, then I want to display the sign-in link on the page. So I call logo tag and pass the same parameters in, basically saying return them back to this page after sign in. Provide the specify the time window, force login, and several other parameters. That's what causes the sign-in link to be on the page. But first, let me go change the time window here to 100 and save that. I'll go back to the AdventureWorks page. I'm signed in. So now if I refresh this page, what's going to happen? The first clause of that the first branch of that code, it's going to go, okay, I have a ticket, but now it's not fresh enough anymore. Now it's been more than 100 seconds. So response.redirect to the Passport login servers, the logo, to authorl, which is this page, and request, and in this case, because I'm already signed into Passport, I'm just refreshing my credentials. Passport says, okay, I know who you are, but now I want you to, I just need you to type your password again for, to meet the security requirements of this site. So now if I type my password correctly, I'll be redirected back to the AdventureWorks site. Now I've got fresh credentials. So this time I fall through this first if clause, and now it says, okay, great, my credentials are fresh enough. So response.write logo tag, and that will basically, logo tag basically returns some HTML, which gets response.writed into the page, and what that HTML is that gets returned is the Passport sign out scarab. In this case, because I'm signed in, it returns the sign out form of that. If I wasn't signed in, it would say sign in. So that's how you can control the ticket freshness and how you can use authorl and logo tag to add Passport sign in to your site. So how about sign out? What happens? When you sign out from a Passport site, it links to the Passport login server, which I know is kind of backwards. It's kind of like you have to click start to shut down Windows. Well, sort of same thing for Passport. You you redirect to the login server and you hit the logout page. What it does is it calls the expire cookie URL for each site you visited. So when you register for a Passport site, you specify the URL to your expire cookie page, which is basically your logout page. And we maintain a cookie of all the sites you've logged into, called the visited sites cookie. It lives in the Passport domain. So we just enumerate all the sites in that cookie, display the login page, and on the login page we say, okay, go out and hit the sign out page for each one of those sites that they're signed into. And that will tell those sites, delete your Passport cookies and any other cookies that you have. So the site then, URL, it cleans up those cookies and then returns the little check mark that says, okay, I'm done, I've signed out. So let's look at what that sign out code looks like. So this code is right out of the SDK, basically unmodified. It says, okay, tell all the proxies and browsers to, not to cache this page. When it gets invoked, set the MSP prof, the profile cookie, to null and set its date into the past. Expire the auth cookie, so basically whack the Passport cookies so that in the future Passport Manager will think that you're not signed in. You add whatever your own code is, any other cleanup, cookies you want to delete or whatever, you add that there. I've inserted this little loop here to insert a delay so it won't flash by too quick. And then way down at the bottom here in the text that you can't see, is include the sign out GIF. Include the little check mark saying I signed out. So what happens is this page, you see the Passport sign out page. It goes out and calls this page. We delete the cookies. We sit there and spin in a loop for a few seconds, and then we return a GIF. And so the way that looks to the end user customer is you click sign out, which will link over to the Passport sign out page, and it's sitting there going thinking while it's spinning on that loop. Then the GIF gets returned. The page redirects to the return URL that was specified, and voila, I'm back to the AdventureWorks site, and now I'm not signed in anymore. So that's that's how. So customizing Passport. We really view Passport as it's kind of basic plumbing. It's not a feature in and of itself. Nobody comes to Passport to use Passport. They are using some other site. They want to get into an MSN web community. They want to buy something at buy.com. They want to register for a product on Microsoft.com. So we want Passport to be seamlessly integrated into that site as possible, so it's a real smooth experience. So there's extensive capabilities within Passport to customize our screens to make them really look like an integral part of your site. You can specify a style sheet to adopt so that the Passport pages will be displayed with the same colors, fonts, borders, etc., even watermark on our pages as you have on your site. You can also use what we call our client-side co-branding technology, which is very, very clever and very powerful, to inject dynamic content into the Passport pages to really customize them and make them look like part of your site. You don't have to do this. It's totally optional. You can, you can do nothing more than just provide a GIF that will stick, a banner ad size GIF at the top of the page that we'll put on our pages when linked from your site. Or you can go wild and do some really cool stuff with style sheets and co-branding, and I'll show you what some of those are. There's two different methods of doing co-branding. What we call snippet-based co-branding, which is everything you see today, where you link to the Passport sign-in page, there's a graphic across the top, and there's a couple places on the screen where the site can insert HTML. You can do some pretty cool stuff with that, but it's fairly limited. So we created a new version that's live now that we call token-based, and those are crappy names, and we'll probably fix them. But for now, that's what they're referred to in our documentation. But it basically says our login server will look for a token in your co-brand file that says where to put our login module or our registration module, and then everything else on the page is controlled by you. So you basically just paint all the HTML on the page, and we just stick our sign-in module where you say to put it. So it provides a considerable amount of flexibility, which I'll demonstrate in a minute. So the site provides URLs to us as part of the site registration. The files live on your site. They're hosted on the partner site. Passport inserts URLs into our pages to go fetch the co-brand, have the browser go fetch the co-branding from your server, and then we use document.write commands in the HTML to have the browser inject the HTML into the appropriate places on your page. So let's take a quick look at, say, how the CSS works. So here's the CSS sheet for the CSS sheet for the AdventureWorks site. Pretty basic, but that's Visual InterDev for you. And let me just go change the background color here from white to, say, something fairly not too ugly. I'll change it to this nice color of beige. Save that. And now when I go over to the AdventureWorks site, I'm going to go through this path and say, oh, hey, kayak, well, I'd like to buy that. And I want to click on, add that to my cart. Well, the cart is protected by, by the color I picked. It's kind of weird. There. I don't know why that didn't refresh. But so the cart is protected by Passport. So you have a roaming shopping cart. Well, in this case, actually, I meant to show you this page before I saved it. But before, when you saw this page, it was just plain white. Well, now when I changed the style sheet, saved it on the AdventureWorks server, when the Passport login page renders and it goes out to the Passport server, it goes out to AdventureWorks and pulls down the style sheet, it's now getting the one with this sort of yellowish tan background instead of the plain white background like we had before. So for it works in a similar fashion as you supply URLs to us. And those URLs are to a JavaScript file on your site. The file can be really basic, as we'll see. In fact, here I'll show you an example of just how basic it can be. This is like the simplest possible co-brand file. Let me switch it over. Thank you. And all it does basically is it has a little JavaScript command that says, set this well-defined variable to this blob of HTML. So for snippet-based co-branding, all it does is it's setting JavaScript variables to specify the content that you want the Passport inserted into the Passport pages. So you have a graphic at the top and a couple of regions on the login page, and then when the browser loads up the page from the login server, it goes out and grabs that JavaScript source file and then does document.write. Takes the value of the variable that you set, spews it at the top of the page, another one to the right side of the page, and to allow you to co-brand it or make it flexible. So here go back to this machine. So I'm going to just remove this comment on the on this co-brand file, save it, go back to the login page, and now when I refresh this page, when the login server, wow, I don't know why the color changed, but now when I go back to the login, when the login server pulls the co-brand file from the AdventureWorks site, now that variable is set to something, and so this little "Hi there, please sign in and learn more about the Zippy Kayak" shows up on the page, and you can do a lot cooler stuff with that. So let me show you how you can do cool stuff with that. I'm just about to have this folder open already. So let me. I'm going to delete that co-brand file and take a more replace it with a more advanced CoBrand file and see what you can do. So now I've got a CoBrand file that does some more sophisticated stuff where it sets a couple of different variables at the top of the page. Just put some HTML at the top to make it look nice like AdventureWorks, and some other stuff down the side. And this is flexible because you can pass arguments to us that we will turn and pass to you. So several of the parameters to the Passport Manager, one of the parameters is a CB parameter, CoBrand, which basically take this CoBrand variable and pass it through to the Passport login server or registration server or wallet server, which will then pass back to you in the reference to your CoBrand file. So then when your CoBrand file is referenced, you'll get this CB variable, which might be an order number or a customer ID or something that you can use to, or a product identifier or something that you can use to dynamically generate the co-branding. You also, because the co-brand files live in your domain, you see cookies in your domain. So any session state or whatever that's living in a cookie can be used to dynamically render the co-branding. So while the co-branding file can be as simple as just basically a text file that sets variables to some HTML, and you don't even have to be that fancy if you don't want to. It can also be very complicated. It can have complicated script that dynamically renders co-branding based on the customer and the state of their transaction. We also pass back a language ID. So one of the query string parameters that gets passed to the co-brand file is LID equals 1033 for US English or 3082 for Spanish. And so that you can render co-branding in the proper language. All right, so let's see. I think did I do my example of snippet-based co-branding? Yeah, I think I did. So that was this, what you can do with sort of snippet-based co-branding. It's kind of cool, but you're sort of locked into snippet-based co-branding. It's kind of cool, but you're sort of locked into the structure of the page. Graphic has to be at the top left corner. Page has to be centered. You can put stuff above the sign-in module and to the right, but everything's left but the sign-in module is on the left side. So the footer is controlled by us. So it's not it's okay, but it's not that great. So we came up with this token-based co-branding, basically at the request of Microsoft.com, right? Because Microsoft.com has a very very distinctive look. To all the pages. They all have this graphic across the top. They all have this menu across here. And they basically said, hey, we want to use Passport, but we can't have it go off, have it look like you're jumping off into outer space, right? It's got to look like you're still within Microsoft.com. So that's what we modified our co-branding to go to this token-based approach where the site can control the entire structure of the page and basically say, where do you want the Passport login module or registration module, and then they control the HTML stream of the page. So they stream out HTML, they stick a token into their HTML that say, okay, Passport, put your stuff here, and then the rest of the page is, and then they complete the HTML stream. So that's what's happening over here on the